And we're good.
Welcome to Non-Monster Lore and Character Building Q&A by Squire, Antoinette, Master Seneschal, and Sir Calediah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I know we're kind of in the midst of classes and we're right before lunch, so I'm hoping that this is enough to keep the hooks in folks as we go. I've been talking with folks recently, but I'm Calediah, Sir Calediah of Grand. I've been fighting for about 10 years, and in that time, I have been a lore geek and one of those role-play kids the entire time. I also basically started my life as a theater kid, so this has kind of been in my blood for a long time. But yeah, I have a lot of passion for the non-roleplay side, or the non-combat necessarily side of Bellegarth. So, brief credentials there. I founded Sons of Silas. It's been 8 years. Holy cow! It's been like 7. Oh my gosh, 8 years ago. And the big goal of it was, at the time, really the only roleplay centric units that were around were Horde and the Order. And of those, I looked at it and I said, no, there's plenty of room for another group that does trials and ceremonies and storytelling. And so I started to lean into that. So the big question, anytime I'm talking to people about roleplay in stick fighting stuff, is why roleplay in a combat sport? Bellegarth has no classes. There is no mechanical benefit to roleplay. And there are a lot of people that alone, you can barely get people to invest in the necessary parts of Bellegarth, clothing. But one great thing about Bellegarth is the a la carte nature of the game. You can engage in what you want to engage in, and especially with the growth of the guilds, and every year there is more and more focus to have things at events that's not just strictly fighting or drinking. So with those things, you get the a la carte nature of Bellegarth, or what I and some other people refer to as Bellegarth DLC. This is your crafting, your bardic, roleplay, all of the things that are not enumerated in the Book of War, which is to say everything that isn't field fighting is this kind of DLC experience. You're plugging and playing, you're picking the things the traditional conversational way that LARPs happen. One big concern, and this is something that has been talked to death by a lot of people, is that lore and roleplay is not exclusively for monsters.
And that's why we're here.
Yeah, so anybody that's watching this, the odds are good that the only RP you've seen anywhere near the field is a Hellhammer field entrance or Horde doing Horde things, because all over the country people have been part of Macoup trials. People have seen Hellhammer walk in breathing fire and carrying Vok on a palanquin. But the majority of the people that roleplay are monsters all across the country. And with that comes this kind of quiet perception, and it's fading, it used to be worse, that the only people in Bellegarth that are engaged in RP are monsters. And more so, that because of that, all RP is inherently tied to monsters. And that is not true. That is not the case. There is a great phrase that I've been using for a couple of years anytime people ask me about like role-playing rules or things. Stick dork is who cares because shut up. It's exactly what you make of it. And especially in roleplay, the only thing stopping you is the voice in your head saying, I shouldn't do this. Go into it. Jump into it. It is for everybody. And anybody that tells you otherwise is being a jerk. So everybody can do it. This is not just for monsters. You do not have to ascribe yourself to anything that's already there. Later on, I'm going to be talking about integrating with existing lore, because that's its whole own thing. But before we get to some of the more specifics of Bellegarth roleplay, I wanted to talk about some writing exercises, some writing pitfalls and perils that overcoming. One, it helps. These are creative process things. So anything creative you're working on, a couple of these tips are going to be. Sorry, Antoinette, I'm way ahead.
Yeah, you started talking and didn't stop, and I know how hard it is to get you to stop talking. So I'm just wait till he stops. Hi, I'm Antoinette. I also do the lore thing. And I started doing lore because I was in the order, and then the order doesn't exist anymore. And most of my lore is sort of based in that idea that lore can exist even if you're not a monster, and that the world around us is fun to try to put into stories, be they songs or actual writing. And when I sat down to figure out what classes I could teach and how I could get some Midwestern perspective into our very Western event, I'm like, I'm going to talk to Calediah and see if we can do a lore thing. And here we are. And I'm going to let him keep talking because I've been talking for the last 2 days straight.
Yep, I kind of took off into this at breakneck pace, so I am sorry about that.
I caught up.
So anyway, talking about writing pitfalls and perils. The first bullet point there, something bad on paper is better than something great in the ether. Drafting is a necessary part of the writing process, and if you are creating lore or anything like that, you are you're engaging in writing. I mean, even if you never, something bad on paper, you don't have to write it down as long as you are getting it out there. You can keep a story in your head and it can keep boiling and percolating. And if you never say it out loud, then nothing really comes of it. Is one of the most fun parts of Bellegarth lore, apart from just how much of it there is the fact that everybody can get up and tell those stories. Everybody can participate. And by telling those stories, everybody is connected. The whole beauty of oral histories is that you can kind of walk back up the hierarchy of a story all the way back to the first person that told it. And that's something in incorporating into lore that we can talk about further down. Let me pull my notes back up. There we go. So right now, edit later. With all creative endeavors, it is that voice in your head that is saying, well, if you can't do it perfectly on the first go, then you're wasting your time or you're never going to get it. And that's not the case. Writing, storytelling, everything, it comes in drafts, like I was saying earlier. And get it on the paper, get it in front of other people, get feedback, go back and revise. But in the process of writing or creating the story, don't edit. Don't cut anything out on the first cycle. All that you are looking to do is to get your thoughts out there. Because if you stop and edit as you're typing, you type 2 paragraphs and you sit and you look at it and you go, no, I don't like the way that sounds. And then you go back and you delete. Editing after the fact also means that you'll generally be more. Yeah, so those are just a couple of the biggest pitfalls for writing. Don't worry if writing is a skill. It's like singing, it's like sword fighting. You have to practice. And it comes with time. You become a better writer over time. And there is this thing that is the author's voice. Every writing book that you can read, there is Stephen King's On Writing, which is pretty accessible. Like most Stephen King writing, it is easy to digest. And there are a lot of really good notes in there. And he talks about the author's voice, which is coming into your own anecdote. Way back in the before times, the long ago, there's a website called Gaia Online. And Gaia Online is just the most anime weird website, but It was full of forum role playing and read things that I was writing in. And you grow and you change and you learn how you want your words to sound, which comes from practice. So the technical skills of writing, there are a ton of books, and I will urge you to look elsewhere because I don't consider myself a very strong writer. Everything kind of lives in my head. But read it, look into it, and practice. Practice, practice, practice. Write for 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day, if that's all the time you have. Or tell stories into the recording device on your phone. Just get the practice.
Honestly, half of my lore exists in this weird, like, something happened and I wrote it down. And because my lore exists in, like, a journal format, I have, like, full-on time periods where I've written nothing, and it's just, like, placeholder text. It's like, stuff happened here. I don't remember what happened. I'll write it in eventually, and it'll all be fluff. But it's just, like, paragraphs of me rambling about the nothing that needs to, or the something that needs to go in this space that I have to worry about later. And, like, years later, some of it's still sitting like that.
All right. Something in chat.
The chat would like to point out, Hixa specifically, one, says the man with Russ shorts, and two, that she uses Google Drive a lot for the bullet points for lore writing, which is a great way to, like, keep track of things if you just have, like, quick points you want to write down. Google the notes on your phone, but bullet points are awesome.
Yes, they are. All right. So one of the biggest pitfalls for a lot of people is, this is a specific non-monster thing. A lot of people, when they decide to go monster, what that does is it taps you into an already existing body of story, which you can be reading through it, I mean, it's anybody that has played D&D, you know, you can be reading through a source book and you just see something neat or a town mentioned or wherever, and it gives you a free jumping off point. It gives you an immediate connection. But with non-monster roleplay, even the process of just kind of figuring out who you want your character to be is a tough hill to overcome. So if you want to go to the next slide, Antoinette. Okay. So anytime that I'm helping someone write a story, there are 4 basic bullet points that I talk through them with. Where did you come from? Where are you going? Where are you now? How did you get? And this covers, like, the origin story, motivations, you know, starting with who are you? Where is your character from? What kind of things do you do? And from there, it's, okay, those are the things, those are you as you are now. Where'd you come from? You know, and it can be city, nation, tribe, barge, whatever. The jumping off point, the where did you come from, that is the first bullet points of your story. I have a lot of lore that I've written over a long time. And anytime that I am writing a new character, I will just, and I have a basic motivations. What's going on? Where are you going? So that is, what is your goal as a character? What is driving you? Why did you pick up your sword and shield? What's going on? Where are you now? In a lot of people's role play, especially, this is something that I kind of saw start with the Order, and that we've picked up with Sons of Silas, but it helps to connect things a little more, is the process of turning what's going on in Belagarth now into storytelling. And that's something that we're going to cover more in depth later. And how did you get here? What happened to your character between where you came from and where you are now. These 4 questions can give you a lot of inspiration for kit, for practices, for really anything that's going on. And the final note there is that you are the main character in your story. But that does not mean you are the main character in every story. So there's, there are movies, there's all kinds of things where it will sweep back and forth between characters with their own independent plot. All of them are happening parallel to each other. So in the greater story that is Belagarth, no one's really the main character. And that's what makes for opportunities in Belagarth roleplay. Everybody is pursuing their own goals. Everybody is building their own storyline. And that gives everyone room to develop.
And that point of that you're the main character in your lore comes into play a lot, especially when you're doing like unit storylines. So it was incredibly important at that point in the Order lore because we were also focused on the exact same event. In this case, something that happened at a Ragnarok that affected the lore of an entire realm in Dagahir. And that event, we all wrote lore on the same point, but because we were all our own main characters in that lore, what I wrote is different than what Static wrote, is different than what Ixis wrote, is different than what Spaff wrote, but it's all about the same thing. And that's where you start to build a world. You have this one event and everyone's writing about it, but all of the stories are just a little bit different. You can all tell it's the same thing and it all happened on the same day, but because we all had different experiences in what was happening, there's just that little bit of difference to make it a whole like view of the day versus like the one storyline of the one character and how their day went.
Yep, and that very neatly connects to kind of the next point. We already touched on it a little bit of bringing eventing stories into your lore. And it can start as even just little writing prompts of like, hey, here's this thing that happened. What's everyone's perspective around it? Like the Battle of Arendor. And this isn't really a point that needs a lot of belaboring, but it's when you're doing communal storytelling, it brings everybody together. It is a bonding experience to have multiple views of the same event from people that you are doing the storytelling with. Because not everyone's is perfect. And over time, as people learn more of them, the story grows and changes and it becomes... So with event storylines and narrative trials, this is where you're going to see the history of the fictional world. Everything's written down, but it's passed down by the telling of it. With these event storylines and narrative trials, what we're looking at is ways of bringing your role play onto the field. So your role play is informed by the lore. It's who you are. It's how you act in the light of the world. And for a lot of people, just doing it on the field is 1, very difficult, and 2, unwelcome. If I'm on the side of the field talking to people and like making plans, most people is a good way to get people to just kind of scoff at them, engage with people. And by doing it in trials, it is a space where it is expected everybody's in character, everybody's participating. And that builds the atmosphere. If there's one person...
The Juggernauts have an intention of going to war. When we get back to the ability to do the thing. And it's also why, and so like having those things, like those physical declarations of war or what have you, that turn into like physical scrolls and items that you can like hand over to the group of humans or monsters you're going to war with, is a really good way to like make sure that everyone knows that during certain points in time, you're going to be doing this really heavy RP thing, and sort of planning out when those are going to happen, so you're not like invading everyone's space with this storyline that no one wants to talk about.
Yep. And like along with that, for Sons of Silas, what we do, everyone's initiation trial takes the form of basically a solo adventure. It is their time to be the main character in the story. And it's still a difficult trial. Everyone, we kind of tailor make it to the members, but it builds into the story. It gives them a tangible place. And the trial is an area of, all right, we're gonna do some role play stuff. Let's go. And it creates really memorable stories, you know, even without a lot of, you know, people talk about immersion with LARPs. One of the biggest things for immersion is just having everybody around you on board. The props don't have to be great. You don't have to be in a specific location. There can be cars on the parking lot, and you can still create an immersive trial that really gets someone in the moment. And when you do that, there are a couple things to take note of. If someone is super into the role play, and it is very heavy role play, occasionally, if you can have a way of checking in or everyone showing that they're still okay to keep going is important, because you get into it, you get really focused, and you can become so immersed that you disconnect from the real world. You kind of plug yourself into wherever you are. And with that deep of an immersion, there's this thing called bleed. And bleed is where your roleplay thoughts and your out of roleplay thoughts slide into each other. And
also create really dangerous situations, specifically when your unit decides that trial at night with minimal light in the dark is a great idea, even though it poured rain earlier that day and the ground is all wet, and your unit leader bleeds to the point where he starts turning off the torches that were providing a minimal amount of light to begin with, and you have to pull everyone out of roleplay because one of your guys' weapons breaks and someone almost gets cored in the head with a core. So it can turn into a really dangerous situation.
Yep. So be conscious of what's going on. Make sure that everybody is consenting to what's going on. And that just makes for better role play. Like, that is the trick. Everybody's involved. Everybody wants to do it. Yeah, with the wars and that, all of these props, all of these mechanics are part of the biggest thing of Belagarth roleplay, because on the field, nobody is really going to last long enough to have a character storyline on your average Belagarth field. That just doesn't happen. And so a lot of Belagarth's roleplay is visual, and we're going to talk about that later, of ways to passively roleplay, but it's an important part of it. So these event storylines, these trials to advance and making those trials part of the story is a great way of bringing role-playing into a very combat-heavy game. And it's a way of getting people that even may not be big role players. I'm sure everyone knows, at least one person that has absolutely no interest in role play and is a knight. There's obviously the thing of, there's parts of role play, of being a knight, that aren't role playing, of the dedication to service and all of the effort that goes into it. But calling yourself Sir something, you've taken the first step. It is part of a group role play where all of these people have created peerages and have become knights. It's already there. They've already taken the first bite. But yeah, those are the biggest things for role playing on and around the field. Give people their time to shine. So, with existing lore, monsters have lots of lore. That is the easiest way to put it. That is the most direct way to put it. There's a ton. You could find everything. And if it's not there, somebody's going to write it very quickly. So, reading lore, it's all kind of scattered around on the Geddon Wiki, but if there's something that you're interested in, you can look it up, read into it. People's individual lore, all of the creation myths and stuff, all of these are part of working into kind of the Bellegarde framework, because monsters, by dint of being the most prolific role players, there's a lot of body of work out there, and that gives you a lot of room to go, okay, here's a situation where I can create stories that will tie into things that other people have written. There's a piece of lore that is in basically every monster lore tradition that is the casting of stones. And it's a thing where all of the gods got together and threw their stones to figure out where their people were going to live on Earth. And that's a good place to start. You know, if you're doing your own spin on dwarves or whatever creation you have, if there is a deity of your people, they would have been there at the casting of stones. So that's a good place to start, of integrating your deity into that casting of stones. Along with reading, not just reading the lore, is engaging with other people that want to role play. For this, it can be a struggle between finding people that do role play and then getting things orchestrated. Events are a nightmare hellscape of scheduling conflict. The process of getting everybody, thank you, Calediah, for posting that. In chat, there is a link to the story for the casting of stones. Yeah.
I do think we need to asterisk here. Most Midwestern events are a scheduling nightmare due to the amount of things that have to go on and where people are expected to be at those things. With Western events being slightly longer and things just set up being slightly different, there is often more time to do things creatively with other people at like Chaos Wars or Bifter or Western Wars, just because Troll's not open till 2 a.m. Troll ends at 5, so you can get off of, you're not like worrying about those sorts of things, and there's just a little bit more breathing room schedule wise, and that's just a cultural continental divide thing. So when Calediah is mentioning that events are a scheduling nightmare, it's because most Midwestern events are a scheduling nightmare. And that's the experience that he has, versus when I say like the way we can mold and do things at events is a little bit more freeform, because I'm now so used to a Western event where there's just a little more breathing room in a day. Like we have scheduled lunch breaks at Chaos Wars and most Western events, so we can take that time to do things where there's no such thing as a scheduled lunch break at Armageddon or Oktoberfest.
Nope.
So it's just a little cultural thing, that just so people are aware.
So for engaging with other role players, you're going to have to network. You're going to have to find out what people want to role play, what people are going to come engage in it, and the people that are going to be excited about it. So like when witch doctors do their vigils, it's open invite. As part of the trial, they have to tell their stories. And with that comes a little bit of crowd heckling from the monsters, of disagreeing with stories, back and forth banter. And one, if you are doing that kind of bantering, do be sure that any barbs you're throwing out are gentle enough, unless you really know the person. Because that line between I'm being mean in character and I'm being mean is razor thin. So be conscientious. Don't twist the knife on people if you are bantering in character, unless they've agreed to that. If they've agreed to it, go for it. Bombs away. But engage. If there's a role-playing event or a storytelling event going on, go be part of it. And go into active role-playing and passive role-playing. Active role-playing, like there's a project that I have going on that involves shared lore with the orcs. And so I've been, when I initially got started with it, I was talking to Gil, I was talking to Rowan, and building up something that is based off of an event in their lore, and it's monumental in this project that I'm working on. So create your story, but don't be afraid to use your resources. That includes the Geddon Wiki. That includes, going through the daisy chain of people of, hey, I know, for example, it's like, hey, Galia, I'm looking to do this. Do you know anybody that has any story related to that or would be interested? And it's part of the networking. Sometimes you just got to hunt people down and get their piece of the story to add to yours. Like the Belagarth elves right now, there was something that happened last year where all of them gotten together and they all talked and they all hashed it out. And I think that there's now something in the works to be the first common continuity in elf lore in ever. For Belagarth, with connections to the monster lore and with regards to other stories. So find like-minded people to work with, because you don't need to carve every bit of your story out of the stone. You can take bits and pieces that are already
there's Minotaur lore in Jag that might be found in the Creatures of Belendag group that Hixa mentioned, because I know there is a handful of Dag Minotaurs, but I don't think we have any in Bell.
I've not met or heard of one. So to that, I mean, from this, look at other lore, see if there's any kind of continuity or leaping off point that you want to use, and come up with your own story. Because that is the beautiful freedom of Belagarth lore. There is no strict canon.
No,
nothing matters. The world is yours.
There's very little canon, period. So far to the point where there are at least 4 different world maps that people use that are all different, but all the same world.
And to that, just because there is no official canon doesn't mean that there aren't people that willingly connect themselves to an existing canon. Yeah, multiverse. Everything is connected at the same time. Nothing is connected. So it's all part of that cooperative spirit of Belagarth roleplay. Because there's not a strict setting, because there's no strict rules to it. It's what you and other people agree to.
It's sort of like how the Order lore, which is the world in which most of my lore exists in, and the Sons of Silas lore, which is based more in the world that Calediah created and is connected more with the monster lore of Bell, interact because in my personal lore, a paragraph out of a journal written by Calediah shows up in our Order library, and that's like the Moose Witch stuff. And so like these are 2 sort of multiverses that don't like actually touch each other but do, and so it's very much like you can integrate with what's there even if they're not at all similar in like world setup, but we all kind of exist in Belagarth in this weird multiverse kind of a way that works because there's no rules.
To that, Antoinette, if you want to go to the last slide,
Sure.
we'll hit kind of the last big topic and then open it up for a little bit of Q&A at least at the end here. So the window shopping experience. Anybody that is familiar with game design or has ever played a class-based first-person shooter or a MOBA or really any game where immediate visual parity is important, your silhouette and how you look is how people immediately engage with you in real life and in roleplay. So how you look at a distance should inform things about your character. That does not mean that you have to go out and spend $1,000 on garb and accessories chosen to make your kit look the way that you do, you know, if you do war paint, or if you guys have seen me at events where I have that rigid Calediah scar that goes from my hairline to my beard, all of those are immediately part of your role play because people before they've even asked, they look at you and they can say, oh, you know, and I'll back away from the camera a little here so that my garb is more visible. I tend to wear long coats and surcoats. I wear a lot of stuff with sigil work done on it. The sigil on this hood was embroidered by Hixa, and it's got my unit symbols. It has marks of like military orders or of another deity that I pay service to. The way that you look is the first step.
And so like echoing that, you'll see a lot of people, specifically often monsters, but some non-monsters, like, I wear a lot of trinkets. It seems really weird sometimes. Why does she have all that stuff on? They harken back to some things. That silver cuff with a moose on it I wear on my wrist is actually a replacement for a fancy silver bell that's in my lore that we figured out was too delicate to carry around at events. Why does Zeldrin have a huge red line of war paint through one of his eyes? Cord has all of those beads. Some goblins have a red line of war paint down their nose. What does it mean? It's like all those little things harken to something in a passive manner that is RP and lore. And if you stop to ask someone about it, you're going to get the more in-depth answer to that. And so those little things that people do for the aesthetic, because it looks good, generally also if they're heavy or even not heavy into but enjoy RP and lore, are going to harken to something specific in their lore or their storyline or a collective storyline in their unit.
So yeah, all of that is really meant to just be a very entry-level primer on roleplay in Belegarth. Like I said earlier, Belegarth is incredibly a la carte, and because of that, and being able to build your own fun, it's very doable to have some roleplay. Is it necessarily the best environment for roleplay? No. Because Belegarth as a community tends more toward the combat side. But that doesn't mean it's not there. So get out, have the fun with role-playing that you want to have, and create your own stories. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
We got one? Or am I it?
Go for it, man.
Yep.
Oh. I don't know if it's a question or not, but man, so where would be the best place to get started for real?
So with that Minotaur lore idea, the best place to start is not actually the beginning. Coming up with origin stories is a pain in the ass because you have to start creating a lot of continuity and you're putting a lot of arbitrary rules on your storytelling right when you're getting started. So the first thing that I would do if I were you is figure out the visuals of it. Because that passive roleplay in Belagarth is so much more of how you're going to engage with people. What is going to tell anyone that's looking at you, oh, that's a Minotaur. Thieves, lizard men
I have a helmet.
are all...
So yeah, Thor, the way you design how a Minotaur looks is gonna be where I would start. So like the parts of your garb or your armor or your kit, that's gonna be like, that's what a Minotaur looks like.
So I already got my Minotaur built. It's just coming up with his story.
Okay, so from there, and like I said before, I wouldn't start at the beginning. For your storyline of like you as a Minotaur, you can do whatever you want, but if you're looking to flesh out Minotaurs as a race and get other people kind of role-playing in that space, I would look more at your like surface level cultural signifiers. What does a Minotaur look like? What do Minotaurs do or wear? How are their relations to other races? And then build on that. Are you thinking like...
So you know the Belagarth lore through and through, correct?
I know a lot of it. I wouldn't say I know all of it.
So could you help cash me out? Because I do want to make it, fully Bell friendly still. Because if I'm going to do it, I want to do it right. Let's get it started.
Yeah, I'd be happy to work through it with you later on.
Thanks so much.
One thing I did just want to bring up is there is on Geddon an article that was written by myself and Galia about how to create a race. You might find that helpful.
Yeah, the wiki's gonna have a lot of really good information on where to start, and also just like the lore of others and other races and how they've built that sort of extensive world around like monsters and other like races of people. And again, Hixa pointed out in the chat that the Creatures of Bell and Dag Facebook page would be a really great place to like just post like, hey, has anyone else been working on this Minotaur thing? And you might find that someone else has, and then you can work together. And Galia posted the how to create a new race Geddon page or wiki page link in the chat if anyone would like to take a look at that.
You said that to go ahead and reach out on the Facebook page or on the Geddon?
On the Creatures of Bell Dag Facebook page.
Creatures of Dag Facebook page? Okay.
I think it's Bell/Dag.
Bell Dag.
I'm not on Facebook right now.
Any other questions? And if not, I've got kind of a fun anecdote of working the storyline into trials and stuff. With Sons of Silas, when I did my initiation trial, those of you familiar with Stonehouse Park, there was a huge back pasture behind the fighting field that very rarely got used at events. And because of that, it was never mowed. And that field, I know a bunch of units did trials back there because that was a great place to just kind of slip away and be immersed. Because all of the trees deadened the sounds of the event, and the long grass made it feel a little bit more natural, and it was a place where it was easier to kind of slip into character. That's one thing to keep in mind as you're doing it, is it's like, oh, okay, we're going to do it at this site. Ooh, this would be a cool place to do this. Make the scene, make it as big and important as you want. One thing I didn't really touch on is ceremony. So along with the trials, big ceremonies are a great way of getting even people that don't normally engage with roleplay involved. It can be as simple as, you know, you come up with a short little poem, and as your unit is lighting the fire for the first time at the event, get everybody in a circle around the fire, have everybody kind of hold their hands out over the fire, do the recitation, and light it. Everybody's going to feel...
Little bits of RP and lore, unit lore, personal lore, world lore, into like the little things that you do. Like, it's going to sound real weird for people who may not have seen like how you bring RP into like little things. But like at the beginning of every event, regardless of where I am or what I'm doing, if I'm running the event or just volunteering, I'm always going to take a little bit of time away from everyone else and everything and like write down the list of fallen order members to chaos, and then burn that list. It's a little RP thing, and it doesn't do anything, like it doesn't change the way the event works, but it's just that little RP, little in-character thing that you can do to like get yourself into that mindset is really a little tiny way to get you there at the beginning of an event, especially if you end up running yourself ragged at events like a lot of people do.
And the last big thing is, because I'm basically out of material, the only thing that matters is that the story matters to you. Other people may not want to engage in it, or other people may not jump up to it, but if the story that you've created and the role play that you're doing is meaningful to you personally, that's all that matters. You don't have to, you don't have to come up with the new goblin race where, everybody in the game knows what it is. You just don't have to. Not every painting has to be a masterpiece. Not every story has to go down as, the great works of literature. All that matters is that it matters to you.
Sven, can you put up the end screen so we can end the recording, please?
Thank you all very much for your time, and thank you for attending. I think after this is lunch.
After this is lunch, and then the
Shark Tank.
Shark Tank.
Woo!